Welcome to episode 11 of the Dynasty Locker Room podcast. I'm your host, Nation, and today we'll touch on some of those middle round players for your fantasy baseball drafts, looking at overall rankings about 50 to 150. With me today to discuss that, I got Tessmonster and Tyler. Tessmonster, why don't you let us know what you've been up to?
Yeah, we've finally wrapped up all the prospect talk here on the Dynasty Locker Room, ran through all 6 divisions, tackling prospects for fantasy number 1 through 15 in each division. Clearly saw that there was definitely a discrepancy in some divisions versus others. AL East being stacked, AL West being kind of thin. So it was kind of fun to take a little bit of a different look at it outside of a top 100 perspective. And speaking of the top 100, we finished that too. So we finished a write-up on that earlier this week. That's out at the Dynasty Locker Room. But really excited to move full steam ahead into the baseball season with you guys.
Definitely fun to see all of those wrap up and looking on to the regular season for baseball and being able to talk about kind of in-season adjustments coming up. Tyler, what do you got going on? What have you been up to?
Not a whole lot going on. Been doing a lot of my baseball drafts, so a lot of focus has been going towards that. Excited to continue with this top 300 breakdown, especially with our DLR league starting up, and I'm excited to dive in and talk about that a little bit. But right now, just finishing up my boom and bust articles and hoping to start, here in a couple weeks once the season starts, to talk about free agent pickups and guys you should be targeting that might not be rostered in your league.
Most definitely. And that, speaking of that DLR league, that is something that we're currently drafting right now, a nice slow draft. We got 12 teams here. We're currently in round 8. Tessmonster, what do you like about your draft so far?
I didn't know what to make of it at first. I wasn't super excited about going 10th. Had a bunch of hitters that I loved to go right ahead of me. Was hoping Bryce Harper would fall, but luck was not in my favor. Went with Corbin Burns, and since then, it seems every time I think about drafting a pitcher, one gets taken ahead of me, and I'm left with a hitter that I love. Can't complain too much about my draft so far. Got a nice blend of power, some run RBI categories. Was jacked to get Cedric Mullins in the 5th round. Should be a nice blend of steals and home run power, and double dip in there in the 6th with Tyler O'Neill. Pretty excited about my speed and power numbers, and looking forward to rounding that out with some pitchers. Should be a contending roster that I'm excited to dabble with, especially since it's such a different profile than I usually go with.
Well, I hope you weren't ready to give up on your team here in round 8 of the draft already.
That'd be embarrassing.
Tyler, speaking of going into round 8 here, what do you think about your team?
Yeah, I can say, just comparing my team to Tessmonsters, I think he could easily give up here in round 8 because I'm ready to get halfway point and see him in my him see my tail lights here, because I really like I took a different approach, and I think I reached a little bit on Shohei Ohtani, but in a daily league, I was pretty excited to be able to use him from that starting standpoint, and then also be able to, after his starts, put him in my lineup. Unlike Tessmonster, I didn't really go with a ton of speed outside of Whit Merrifield and Ohtani, but I went with a ton of power. I was able to nab up Eloy in the 7th round, which I was pretty excited about. Between Castellanos, Eloy, Matt Olson, and Ohtani, I'm pretty excited to see where this sort of shapes up here going forward.
Yeah, definitely another hitting centric approach. And I guess I copied you all here at pick 5 with going hitters for my first 6 picks in this draft here. So getting just a lot of power and pretty much ignoring everything else with Vlad and Story and Abreu and Yordan Alvarez. Really excited to get Tatis in the 5th in a head-to-head league. That's definitely going to be a second half player that could bump up my wins and make me a real strong hitting team, being able to have kind of that number 1 overall player in the playoff push if this team somehow makes it there. But as we move forward, we'll definitely see what happens with starting pitching. Looks like we all are lacking there in starting pitching and relief pitching. So it'll be a fun shape up to the next 5 to 10 rounds here going forward. But enough about our draft. Let's dive into kind of these middle round players here on the 50 to 150 overall. And let's go right to DJ LeMahieu. We have him at 146 overall. Me and Tessmonster got him in the 130s. Tyler, you got him up at 170. Tessmonster, I try to kick everything off here was why you like DJ LeMahieu this year and moving forward.
This one is really intriguing to be in this range, if only because you can reasonably expect some kind of a rebound. I don't think any of us think that he's a 268 hitter with a 711 OPS, especially in that Yankees lineup. I think some stock has to be given to some kind of a rebound, and we've seen him hit for, a 300 career average. So a 268 average in his age 32 season seems like a very stark contrast for me, especially when you take a look at some of the numbers that kind of played into that, like a really low BABIP, despite, a pretty decent expected batting average and other advanced metrics. So I think that's going to play into his favor this year, and somebody I really like, in contrast to some of the other players that we have around that range, especially given his positional versatility. We've seen him line up all around the infield. I think that gives a little credence to some additional value here. And if he can climb a little bit closer to that, 15, 20 home run mark and give some nice counting stats, maybe 100 runs and 75 RBIs, I think there's a ton of value to be had in this range.
If I did a yearly league with DJ, I would easily rank him up much higher. I mean, obviously age is playing a factor when you're thinking from a dynasty standpoint. So there's guys, like a Tristan Cassis, Nick Gonzalez, that I just value a little bit higher. And that's why, I was able to slide him down. And I do think the decline is a little bit of a concern of mine. That player or that position flexibility, though, is extremely nice when you're looking at first, second, and third base. But, we look at his decline, and I actually am of the belief that his OPS isn't going to jump 800. I mean, he's roughly a career 750 to 800 OPS, and on the decline, it is a little bit concerning for me. He's lost his speed, so that's in a roto league, that's out the window, and the RBIs aren't going to be as much of a factor. But he does score a lot of runs. He still does have the power, and I think 15 to 20 home runs is a real possibility. But, big fan. I had to drop him down below some of those guys.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a safe player to pick in here where you kind of know what you're going to get, even if you're not looking for a big rebound here. But I do think of this as a safe floor with that position flexibility, being able to round out kind of your roster and give you some options when you're looking to take some of those dart throws a little bit later in the draft. So that's why I have him up a little bit higher, being able to kind of know you're getting runs, know you're going to get some sort of RBIs, and then be able to stay with a pretty solid average and get that flexibility moving forward in your draft. Seems like a pretty safe floor for me to want to kind of fill out the middle of my roster here. Tessmonster, anything you want to say here?
Yeah, I guess I want to get into it a little bit with Tyler here, just because I'm wondering what he's seeing that I'm not seeing that could suggest that he can't, replicate some kind of 800 OPS play when we're seeing his expected numbers, well above league average. His average exit velocity is in the top 25 percentile. His hard hit rate's in the same range. So I guess I'm wondering what I'm missing here that would suggest that he can't be that type of player that can provide nice value in this 140 range.
Yeah, I think he does provide a nice, value, like Nation said, with that that position flexibility. But 3 out of his 11 years, he's put up, over 800 OPS, and we've noticed that, his stats have declined a little bit over time. He came to New York. Yeah, we saw him put up a 327, 364 batting average, but we all were of the belief that wasn't sustainable, and we sort of saw that regression a little bit. That 364 batting average was only across 50 games in a shortened season, so I think that was a little bit skewed, but, he's never been, one to put up huge RBIs, so I just think, if you're trying to get a player that's going to hit a lot of those roto categories, I just think there are players, in front of them that, are going to be a little bit, easier to hit more of those categories. So when you're putting names on the board at this range, you could easily swap out certain names. And 32, 33 years old, and we're seeing a little bit of a decline. I'd rather take a younger player that might have a little bit more promise, for a longevity standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to bank on upside, and I totally understand that standpoint. Looking at it from a similar lens, I guess I'll counter that by saying, okay, well, I'll give you the 2020 small sample size, but if you look from 2015 to 2019, he hit 313 with an 818 OPS, yes, over that span with 50 steals. I mean, we're going to see the steals drop. That happens with everybody as they age, but I guess I'm not seeing any indication that he can't return to being a 300 hitter when all of the batted ball metrics suggest that he's hitting the ball the exact same way and ran into a little bit of bad luck when he was hitting last year. So that's what I'm seeing. And I guess that kind of justifies the value for me, where I might take 4 or 5 more good years out of a really good batting average and counting stats in this kind of a lineup.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, yeah, I mean, that 2015 to 2018, he had some great numbers, but albeit that was in Colorado. Now, that being said, his lineup that was around him wasn't as good as what that lineup is in New York. So it sort of, to me, cancels out that, he has more bats around him, but he's not batting in Colorado. So it's just, I think that age is that new factor that's coming into play for me that sort of cancels everything out. And yeah, I mean, I see where you're coming from, and I could easily make a point to throw him up 20 spots or, keep him where he's at in my list, which is right around that 170 marker.
It'll definitely be interesting to see this play out. I guess in that lineup, we'll be able to see kind of that run total he puts up, especially if he goes back to a 300 plus hitter at the front of that lineup. You could easily be seeing 110, 120 runs out of him this year and for the next couple of years. So it'll definitely be something to look forward to moving forward here.
For the sake of curiosity, I do have one more question. We see a guy like Jose Altuve, who we have in the 75 to 80 range, who's of a similar age. So are we seeing something different here? Maybe this is a point of discussion for us, since they're at the same position. What are we seeing different in Jose Altuve's game that kind of bolsters him over somebody like DJ LeMahieu, who's at the same stage in his career?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and I don't want to beat on it too much, it is, he has done it at the same location. He's posted a higher career batting average. He's posted a higher career OPS. I mean, when you think about it, it's just, he's just been a little bit more consistent, and I just have to go for the consistent factor. And he also actually has put up more average RBIs per season. He's put up more average runs per season. So he's got that edge. I mean, age, yeah, is a huge factor, but he just has hit those categories a little bit more. And he's also stolen more bases. So in a roto league, he's just checking all the boxes for me.
I mean, Nation, you can feel free to jump in here too, but I guess what I'm seeing is somebody who's also similarly regressing. I mean, fewer steals since 2018. I think he's got maybe 13 total steals over the last 3 years. I mean, the home run production can't be denied, and it's excellent for somebody who's, heading into their mid 30s. But we're also seeing that batting average not hang around that 330 mark like he used to earlier in his career, versus somebody like a DJ LeMahieu. I expect that to rebound. So I think for me, what I'm seeing ultimately is somebody who is hitting in that better lineup. DJ LeMahieu's in a great lineup too, but he's also not hitting, in a 3 or 4 spot in that lineup. So that RBI production is not going to be as good, like Tyler mentioned. The other thing I see here is definitely a lack of slugging. I mean, DJ LeMahieu probably good for 15 or 20 home runs, but what's that double mark going to be? What's that stolen base mark going to be? So I would agree. He checks more boxes. It's just interesting to see, the different places that these guys are at for being at the same age group.
Yeah, you see the same age group, but I see kind of players who do it a little bit differently. Altuve started his career obviously stealing a lot of bases, getting on base at a high rate, and has transitioned into 30 plus home runs. So I think when you look at kind of their run potential, you're going to see pretty similar between DJ LeMahieu and Altuve. When you look at the RBIs, you'd have to expect Altuve to get into the 90 plus. I know he only had in the 80s last year, but hitting in the middle of that lineup is going to have the potential for some RBIs there. And then he's definitely going to have more home runs than DJ. So it seems like a pretty easy route to move him up, 30 spaces to be able to kind of hit on all those categories again, and not expect any stolen bases. But it does kind of come from that same vein to me of DJ LeMahieu, and why kind of we have him up a little bit higher than Tyler does, is you're going to still get production out of him and be able to hit most of the categories and be able to kind of build around him in the middle of your lineup there as you can go take some dart throws later in your draft when you have that safe floor or that safe veteran that's going to get you 3 or 4 more solid years. And let's move it right along to Joe Adell. We have him ranked at 130, and we're all roughly in that rankings. Tyler, why don't you kick us off with one of your favorite prospects, being from your Angels over there?
Yeah, I mean, this is someone who has just not quite lived up to the hype that we thought he would. We thought he'd be, up at 21, which he was, but man, that hit tool did not transfer over. He was struggling. He striked out 55 times in 38 games. It was sort of ugly to see. And if you guys remember, I mean, he had 2 home runs that year bounce off his glove and go over the fence. It was just like, we thought this would be a defensive guy that would steal a lot of bases, put up a good amount of home runs. And then in 2021, he finally came up another 35 games and sort of stabilized a little bit, but still had a low average. That hit tool wasn't quite transferring over, but the experience obviously was building. His defense looked a little bit better. Through spring training, we've seen that success sort of transfer over. If you're a believer in Adele like I am, you in a roto league, you're going to get someone that could easily steal 15 to 20 bags and put up 15 to 20 home runs. And I think that is on the conservative side in my mind with the home runs. I think he has, good power potential. He is going to strike out a lot, but I think that the hit tool, the power, the speed's all going to play. So at a guy that's only 23 years old, you're going to get quite a steal here.
Yeah, I mean, when you said Adele, I thought of the music artist, because someone like you is exactly what we all need Joe Adele to be. We've talked about him for years with that prospect pedigree, and as Tyler mentioned, he just failed to make an impact in 2020, but we definitely saw a revamped Joe Adele last year. Even though the batting average wasn't fully there, we definitely saw him make a mark. His average exit velocity was way up. His barrel rate was up, and it translated into success on the field. We're still waiting to see that launch angle climb. Definitely a guy who hit a lot of ground balls last year, 46% ground ball rate, only 26% line drives, 18% fly balls. So be looking to see him lift the ball a little bit more consistently, to see that exit velocity climb a little bit, see that batting average climb a little bit. But we did see him walk a little bit more effectively last year, 8 walks in only 35 games. Still looking for that plate discipline to arrive, but with all the tools we've seen in the minor leagues, I think that's on the way. There's just a ton of love there's a ton of love about him in this lineup, especially a lineup that we expect to feature Anthony Rendon, Walsh, Ohtani, Trout. If he can make an impact, if he can hit somewhere around these guys, the results are sure to follow. The extra base hits will follow. The runs will follow, especially the RBIs if he's hitting behind these guys. So there's a ton to love. I don't know where he's going to be hitting yet. Tyler, maybe you can expand a little bit about where you've seen him hitting in the lineup in spring training. But I like a lot about him, and I expect him to certainly outperform some of the projections that are out there from Zips or wherever you look at.
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of seen him hit all over, unfortunately, so I don't think it's really set in stone. If I'm a betting man, he's going to be betting at that bottom with Ohtani, Trout, Rendon being your first 3, and then, something like Walsh, Upton and Stassi being, next line. But I don't think it's going to take much for him to climb up in that order if he's having success. But I do see him having a spot in the outfield this year. And I think, we could see 120 plus games for him. So I think we could start to see that value climb this year.
Yeah, definitely somebody that is riding my bench right now, but I did call him up. So any of those home runs and steals he can add to my lineup is definitely something I'm looking forward to. And I think he's already hit 3 home runs this year in spring training. So it's just, if you put any stock into spring training numbers, you can still see the power still being there, evident at least. But definitely looking forward to a full healthy year of Joe Adell this year and being able to see him break onto the scene, kind of like we've been expecting for the last couple of years. But I think I'm on the same page as everyone else. I expect him to exceed the expectations this year and definitely be a great hold for the future. And now let's slide to, I guess, somebody who you're also hoping to break out this year, but in a different way. And that's going to be Cody Bellinger. We have him ranked at 122 overall. And we have Tyler has him ranked at 95. I have him ranked at 142 with Tessmonster being in the middle. And this is somebody who, again, we've seen the MVP season. We know what he's capable of when he's hitting the ball and making contact. But again, this spring training is looking pretty ugly for him. Tyler, what do you think about him and kind of his contact rate? Is that going to go up this year?
You know, the only reason I'm putting him much higher than you guys is you got to remember he's only, 26 years old this year, and you factor in what he did between 2017 and 2019, averaging roughly 34, 35 home runs per, season, roughly about 195 RBIs per season. And I mean, it's just, I don't expect him to ever be a 300 hitter again. If he's a 250 hitter, he rightfully so deserves to be in that top 100 because he's going to have that power follow. And especially in that lineup, I just think this is a player that's going to have a lot of value. So I think that contact rate is going to climb up. I think he's going to have a lot of protection around him where, they're going to be really aggressive after him. So I think he could get a lot of favorable pitches. So I don't know. I hope he turns around. This is my last year of faith on him because I have investment on him.
I guess for me, the only reason I have him ranked as highly as I do is because of his age, but I'm not holding out much of any hope at all anymore, unlike my colleague over there. We've seen him fail to, hit water if he jumped out of a boat or whatever metaphor you want to use here. We've seen that barrel rate consistently fall from 12 and 13% when he was hitting the ball consistently to 7% last year, which is above major league average, but not with the launch angle he's currently sporting. His exit velocity is down. Everything's down. His chase rate's up. I mean, we've seen him strike out, 15 times now in 22 at-bats in spring training. I mean, there's just not much left for me to hang my hat on. And for you to say that he's protected by a lot of bats around in this lineup, well, look at the lineups that have been around him for the last 2-3 years where he's had guys like Corey Seager, Max Muncy, insert name here. So, yeah, I don't think protection is the issue. I think he's just failure to thrive or whatever you want to say here. I mean, a 165 batting average in 95 games is pretty tough to hide, and it's an even uglier OPS. So I'm ranking him in this range. I'm holding out hope in a sense, but I'm not drafting him. I want no part of him. I'm not betting on any kind of a rebound that I can put any stock in.
I mean, when you look at 2020, though, he's still put up roughly an 800 OPS. And this last season in 2021, we saw him face multiple injuries where he'd be back for a week, gone for a week, back for 2 weeks. So it was one of those things that I'm in a belief that, we've seen a lot of these players go injured and really struggle until they can really get their wheels under him. And he has that type of timing with his, his plate approach that he needs to have some games under his belt to really have success. So I'm hoping that, if he stays healthy like he did in his first 3 years, that can sort of come around.
Do you have any issues or concerns, Tyler, that he's, I guess, in his 26-year season, but is now spent the offseason trying to fix his swing? And it doesn't look like it's helping. Seems like it could be something in his head there too, especially striking out this much in spring training while trying to kind of make big adjustments to his swing. Is there anything there that raises the red flag for you?
Well, of course. The red flag's been raised for a long time with him, but when someone's able to put up 30+ home runs and put up the numbers that he has and still be on a team that he's playing on with that killer lineup, there's a lot that can cancel out that concerns. But this is the last year for Cody Bellinger for me.
Anything you want to touch on at the end there, Tessmonster, about Cody Bellinger?
I mean, I don't think there's much left to say that hasn't been said. Obviously, I've got my concerns. It's hard to say what's gone wrong other than he's got that severe uppercut, and you can see that in the launch angle that he produces. So if he's not hitting the exit velocity like he did when he was putting up those home runs, that's going to be a concern for me, especially when you see him struggle with the hitters around him that he has. I mean, he hasn't been able to get on base, so he's not producing those counting stats. We saw him cross the plate only 39 times in 95 games. That's not something I want any part of. And the RBIs were even lower at 36. So I'm fine sticking stock in him one more year if you're a believer, but I want no part of him.
Well, let's move away from the hitters now, and let's go up a little bit to Lance McCullers Jr. We have him at 104 overall. Me and Tessmonster have him in the 70s, and Tyler got him at 155. Is it the injuries that scare you off, Tyler?
Oh, 100%. The talent's there. The team he plays on's there. I mean, you finally saw a good season from him in 2021, and you thought he was rounding the corner, and then, you know, just like that in the offseason, you're hearing about another injury, and now we're seeing his start to the season being delayed, and there's belief that, you know, he might miss a good chunk of the season. But, you know, for someone that, you know, has only pitched over 100 innings once in the last 3 years, and even before that, he never even hit 150 innings. I just don't know how much stock I can put in him to want to throw him in my top 100. I'm of the belief that, you know, he's just injury plagued, and I'm not going to keep investing in him.
I mean, injury issues aside, we've also seen him be downright dominant when he can stay on the mound. I mean, you saw, you know, in a full year last year, that strikeout rate over 10, that really good home run rate, that really good hit per 9 rate. The walks were a little bit above what he's produced in his career, but also not bad enough to, you know, make his whip unmanageable. I think what I see that I really like is you mentioned pitching on a good team, and there's a lot to like about that, especially if you're chasing wins. But also the strikeout numbers, there's a lot to like about a guy who's going to get 10K per 9, and if he can stay on the bump consistently, I mean, we know he's not going to do it this year with his delayed start to the year, but if he can stay on the bump consistently in his, you know, age 29, age 30, 31 seasons, there's still so much left in his career tank that it's hard for me to write off a guy who's consistently performed when he's been on the bump. So there's a lot of stock I'm taking here where I would rather take him in this range over somebody like a Cody Bellinger who you have ranked similarly. So I think there's the performance is there, which I really love. And the injury issues aside, there's a ton of consistent play. The injury issue is going to be the question mark. And if he can't do that, then you're absolutely right. And he's not going to hold a ton of value. I mean, we've seen it consistently since he's been up in 2015.
Yeah, I guess for me, I see you guys have a guy like Max Fried ranked below Lance McCullers, and I am going to buy much more stock into a guy like, you know, Max Fried, very similar age, but he's pitched, you know, for the last 3 seasons, he's matched innings with a lot of the veterans where he's pitched 165 innings twice. Shortened season, he pitched 56 innings. He, you know, his K rate's not as high as Lance McCullers. It sits right around 9 per 9 instead of 10 per 9, but his walk rate's much more favorable, and he's on a favorable team. So a guy like, you know, Max Fried, someone I'm willing to throw 30 to 50 spots in front of him. And I just think that when I look at the names on the list, Lance just, you know, Tessmonster, we've talked, I have a hard time buying into guys that are injury plagued.
Yeah, and you know, there's some stock to being, you know, if you're a guy who's risk adverse, McCullers definitely isn't your guy. You know, there's also something to be said about, you know, you like Max Fried, and that's fair. But I also see here that, you know, he's a guy that doesn't necessarily go deep into games. I mean, he averages 5+ innings a start. So if the team's not up, you're not going to get the win there. You're not going to get the higher strikeout numbers. If you're in a league that's K per 9 instead of just strikeouts, that might be something that's in your favor. But strikeout numbers, he's not going to pile up in bunches. And he's got a strong whip rate. But all else aside, if we're calling a spade, I'm going to compare them head to head. And, if they're given the same inning loads, I like McCullers quite a bit more.
And I'm generally on the side of don't really care about injuries. I think if you look at even like the NFL or something, the injury concerns of Adrian Peterson for the people who tried to avoid him and coming in being a dominant player in fantasy football for all those years. But I'll usually err on the side, and I guess we'll see that coming up in our next episode on the podcast of where Byron Buxton kind of lands in this scenario as somebody, again, who can be targeted as injury prone, but when he's on the field, he's going to be elite. So I'm usually going to err on that side of I'm going to assume they're on the field, or I'm going to know I'm going to get 100 innings out of them and plan around kind of that side, maybe draft another pitcher or another high upside pitcher later in the draft to compound for maybe that risk of him not being on the field and pitching for me. So thinking about those injuries there, Tyler, what do you have any last things you want to talk about here for Lance McCullers?
Nothing really I want to touch on Lance. I mean, I think, if you're doing a yearly league, I think you have little interest in him this year too. I mean, he's one of those guys that we don't know how much time he's going to miss, but I agree with Tessmonster. I mean, there's a lot of value. We've all talked about, if he's healthy in 150 innings in a year, what kind of numbers he could put up. And, Tessmonster, I know one of our fantasy dynasty leagues we're in, we watched a guy make a conditional trade on the banks that he had to hit 135 innings just because it's well known that there's concerns about it. But if healthy, I mean, I agree. He rightfully earns a spot up the list.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of what you said, Nation, I know you're not as concerned about injuries. While we're talking about it, does that profile change for you at all if we're talking about a year-long roto league versus your typical head-to-head format?
I mean, for me, if you're missing someone for half the season, there's a lot of head-to-head matchups that you're going to be missing a top-tier arm that you invested in. So I think that can, sacrifice quite a bit when you actually think about how you're going to have to compensate for someone that you put that investment in. So, in like a points format, I mean, you can easily make up points a little bit easier than someone that can post a 3.2 ERA in a roto where they're going to have to hit certain categories. You're losing a high caliber player. In a points league, you can make up a 450 point a year pitcher by throwing a 350 point pitcher out there and figuring out where to get points elsewhere. So I think even in a roto, it's even more so in my mind harder to compensate for some of those pitcher injuries when you throw that investment into them.
I think I'm going to go the other way on you here a little bit when you're looking at roto versus head-to-head. With somebody with an injury concern in head-to-head, I think I like them a little bit more because they're going to go out and win some weeks for you. They're going to be able to go and put those numbers up, and then you can fill in the backside, or you can stream a little bit more in a head-to-head daily league to be able to kind of make up to get individual categories versus when you're thinking about a full roto league. You're going to have to value kind of the overall numbers they're going to put up for the season and bank on that side of it, and then kind of get the added bonus when you go into maybe exceeding expectations on that injury risk. But on the head-to-head side, I think I'm definitely somebody who in our DLR league took Fernando Tatis because I'm looking towards the second half of the season and the playoffs and having the best team available there, and then knowing that I'm going to start the season off without him and being able to draft accordingly there. What do you think, Tessmonster?
Yeah, I guess I would say I'm of a similar mind. When you look at those head-to-head leagues, I mean, given, we know what we know about Tatis now, and I think that does a lot to shape your perception. When you're looking at a guy who's had an injury history and you don't know when that time bomb's going to go off, like a Byron Buxton, I think that adds a different caveat to the equation, where you might have to, play with the numbers accordingly to see what you can realistically expect if he only plays this number of games or if he plays more than that. So I think that's a caveat we haven't talked about yet that is definitely worth exploring. But a guy like Tatis, like you said, where you're banking on that at the end of the year, and if you can tread water, play 500 ball until then, I think that's certainly a viable strategy, especially, if you have the lineup or whatever kind of team around him to be able to survive that. So there's definitely some credence to be given to that.
I think even when you're thinking about a Buxton, that's still something you can kind of plan to draft around. I mean, you might be taking your fifth outfielder, sixth outfielder a little bit earlier, or even your second and third a little bit earlier, trying to kind of negate that production and being able to make up for what you might be missing. But I think in a head-to-head league, when you can just play for some specific categories, I think it makes for an injury concern is going to definitely those injury players are going to jump up my board a little bit higher than most people, because I'm looking to kind of get the best talent out there on the field and on my team when they're healthy on a weekly basis. And then from there, be able to stream and build the rest of my team later in the draft. And now let's go head over to one of the first catchers we want to talk about here, or one of the highest catchers, and that's going to be Will Smith. We have him ranked at 87 overall. We're all roughly in that same range on him here. Tyler, why don't you tell us what you like about him and how he slaps the ball?
Yeah, I mean, we saw a sample size of him in the bigs in 2019, and then also in 2020. We saw what that power looked like. I mean, he sort of flashed a little bit in 2019, put up 15 home runs across 54 games, another 8 across 37 games in 2020. But finally this year, we got to see him in a bigger sample size where he carried the load for the Dodgers behind the plate, played 130 games, put up 25 home runs, a favorable batting average, good plate discipline with the walk to K ratio, and his OPS sitting at 860, which I think could even get higher. I mean, in that lineup, he's going to have good run production, good RBI production. He's just not going to hit the steals for you in most category for Roto League. But overall, I mean, I see a bigger season. I think with that DH and the NL, I think he could easily bat one in 150 games, put up 30 home runs and a 900 OPS. So it's hard not to take him as one of your top 2 to 3 catchers in Roto leagues.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you look at what he did last year, he just does so much more at the catcher position than I think a lot of his counterparts do. You saw him draw a lot more walks last year, which is really exciting. If you're in an OBP league, certainly, but his 260 average isn't going to hurt you either, which is also doubly exciting, especially when you're looking at the prospect of a catcher that can hit over 20 home runs. He's in the middle of a lineup where he should be able to post, 80 or 90 in each of the counting stats. There's just so much that he brings to the table that a lot of his counterparts don't, that I think that's why his value is probably more than a position player would be with the same profile. So that's what I like the most about him here. And Tyler mentioned it, with that DH role, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he suits up for 140, 150 games this year and, just let his bat play.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big things with him is with that DH being there, that he can go 140, 150 games this year, hitting in the middle of a great lineup. Even if you're not going to get the kind of JT Real Muto steals out of the catcher, I mean, he could realistically lead all catchers in runs, RBIs, and be right there with Salvi in home runs, or even lead the league in home runs too. So you're looking at, again, a young catcher that maybe should even be up a little bit higher in this list for me. Just banking on the fact that he's going to be a part of a good lineup and he's got a good bat for the next 5 to 10 years coming up here. Anything else you wanted to touch on, Will Smith, here for you, Tyler?
No, not really. I mean, if it wasn't for stolen bases, I mean, he'd probably jump Real Muto in my mind this year easily. And from a dynasty standpoint, I mean, it's hard not to look at a 27-year-old catcher and be like, man, he's got a long future ahead of him, especially in a lineup that has a lot of long signings and is going to be solid for a long time to come.
Yeah, that's definitely exciting to look forward to him, and to have any shares of him on your dynasty team is definitely a big deal that you're looking forward to. And now let's move over to Luis Castillo. We talked about an injury risk, and we got a guy right here, again, coming into the season hurt. Tessmonster, I know you like him a lot here, so why don't you kick us off at our number 81st ranked player?
Yeah, Luis Castillo is a really interesting one to me, and we've seen time and time again how certain aspects of a player's profile will, affect their standing on a draft board. We've seen it right here in our own DLR league where Luis Castillo, who we've got ranked where we've got him, and we're down to pick 90, 100 range, and he's still on the board. We've seen, the injuries slow his spring training, and we know he's going to miss a week or two, but we're also looking at a pitcher who, when he's on has been absolutely dominant. We saw him start absolutely slow last year, and I know Tyler's written an article about just that, but we've also seen him when he turns it around be a force to be reckoned with, especially in the second half last year. Looking at a guy who posts consistently, more than 9 strikeouts per 9 innings. He's up to 10 on his career per 9 innings. Pretty productive whip and ERA rates too. So I guess for me, the real concern is, okay, is he going to not get the wins with the fire sale that the Reds have had? But also when you're going to talk about those ratios and the strikeout numbers that he can produce, he also throws 200 innings, a year when he's healthy. So there's a lot for the counting stats there too. So I'm still seeing a lot of profile I like here, even if he's not going to pick up a ton of wins for you.
Yeah, I mean, this injury's an anomaly too, because he's not very injury prone. He usually is a workhorse for the Reds, but we made this list before all the the fire sale that the Reds did. So I think that also plays into factor of, even if he misses a couple weeks, who cares? He's pretty consistent, but he struggled to get wins last year, and now on a lineup that is non-existent almost, you wonder how many wins he could even put up. So I think, unfortunately for him, his team has brought his value down. So it'll be curious to see sort of what that looks like once he comes back. But I'm not surprised to see him on our draft falling down the board quite heavily.
Even your dog's telling you to put him down the list too here as that injury picks up.
His name's Miller. He's a Brewers fan, and he doesn't like us talking about any National League teams, so it's not a surprise there.
You got to respect it. Again, yeah, I think this is a player who kind of realistically has slipped in the last few years in drafts too. I don't know if it was because of question marks on him being able to be consistent in years past, but again, having him up in the 80s here seems like a very safe bet. I'm not as concerned with the team around him. For the pitcher, I can take a year or two of lackluster wins to be able to get big strikeout numbers and good ERA and whip on that side of it, and then see what happens down the road. There's always trades and everything that can happen with an elite starting pitcher. Teams are always looking for starting pitchers, so I guess that could be a surprise if he's even on the team at the end of the year. But Tessmonster, is there any last things you wanted to say here about Luis?
No, I mean, for me, I guess it's a tale of two players, and it depends on which player you're buying into. I'm not putting a ton of stock into the team around him, just like you, Nation. We saw in the second half he was a 3.18 ERA pitcher, and in the first half he was a 4.65 ERA pitcher. So it depends on which pitcher you're getting in any given outing, but also at the same time, we've seen him be consistently a strong starting pitcher with that elite upside when he's on. And so the team around him and whatever injury concern he has from this spring training is not in my mind whatsoever. And I would love for him to fall back to me in the next round because I'm snatching him off the board.
And now let's go throw it over to a player we all really like and love his potential in Tyler O'Neill. We have him at 68 overall. Tyler, you have the highest ranking here at 60. Why don't you kick us off for us?
Yeah, Tyler O'Neill. I mean, it's one of those guys that there has been a lot of potential on him that I think there's a lot more to be played into factor there. I think from a roto standpoint, he hits a lot of categories. He's got good speed. He flashed out finally getting 15 stolen bases in almost a full season for him across 138 games. Showed what kind of power he has with 34 home runs. Great OPS. I mean, if you're looking for a player to hit all 6 categories, I think this player easily does it, and I think he's only touching the surface. I don't think we're going to see much more power, but we could see a little bit more RBIs. I think he could get a little bit higher batting average, but overall, I mean, if you told me a 27-year-old for the next 6 years was going to even put up the numbers he put up in 2021, I'd easily buy into that.
Yeah, like you said, he checks a lot of boxes. He's got a nice full package that Nation likes. But even beneath those, numbers on the surface, there's a ton of underlying numbers that really lend themselves to a ton of production here. And especially in a head-to-head or a roto league, if you're not worrying about that strikeout rate, which we saw be absolutely dreadful last year, you look at that average exit velocity in the top 10%, expected batting average, on base, and slugging all in the top 10%, barrel rate and hard hit rate in the top 5%. So the guy absolutely mashes the ball. And with the lineup around him, there's just so much to like for a guy who's going to get you the counting stats, 90 and 90. He's going to get 30 plus home runs. He's going to swipe some bags. He checks all the boxes, and he's somebody that I love to continue to produce at a similar level for quite a few years.
Especially in this kind of middle round or just after kind of your top tier players, being able to slot somebody in for the next 5 to 6 years and hit all of the categories, not hold you back anywhere, is a great kind of foundational building block that you're not going to have to think about, if I draft him, I might need to go draft some high average players later in the draft or something like you would need to with a Joey Gallo. But just being able to kind of hit all the categories seems like a really safe pick and a really good pick kind of here in the middle of your draft when you're looking to kind of fill out your roster. And that leads us to another outfielder that just changed teams, and Jesse Winker. We have him at 53 overall, all about the same again, all pretty high on him. Tyler, you like him a lot. Why don't you kick this one off?
Yeah, I mean, this is someone that wasn't really on my radar last year, but after the season he had, putting up 24 home runs across 110 games, great batting average, great OPS. I think he's another guy that's going to hit most of the categories besides stolen bases. And, he was on a pretty potent lineup in 2021, but I think he actually might be even in a better position here in 2022. I think the only question mark for him, holding him back from, taking the next step, is if he can play 140 plus games. So I think this is another, slam dunk. I don't think you can go wrong with him at all.
Right. There's a lot to like. I think the bigger question mark for me is, can he ever figure out how to hit left-handed pitching? I wrote about that in an article earlier this winter that, the left-handed pitchers have really thrown him for fits, especially against those breaking balls, but he absolutely destroys right-handed pitching. And really that's where his value is. So yeah, he might get into 140, 150 games, especially as a full-time DH, but what is he going to do in those games where he's going against a lefty where that might impact his batting average on the whole a little bit? But at the same time, when you're facing most of your at bats against a righty, especially a starter, they can throw out whatever left-handed reliever they want at you, and there's not much you can do about that. But most of your starts are going to be against right-handed starting pitchers, and that's where he derives a ton of value. You touched on it. There's a lot of really nice players around him in that lineup, whether it be a Ty France or that Nation likes or whoever. I mean, there's a ton of solid bats in that lineup. There's a lot of opportunities to produce runs across the plate. We're going to see a nice batting average. It probably won't be 305 if he's facing more lefties than he usually does, but we can also probably expect an OPS that's north of 900 again. So if he's consistently in the lineup, he's a great bat to have, especially in these middle rounds.
Yeah, it checks a lot of those categories like you're looking at for Tyler O'Neill as well. When you can think about just slotting him in, going 90-90, and being able to get you a nice average and a nice OPS, there's nothing to shy away from, and being able to build around that going forward, especially if you're looking at a daily head-to-head league too for Roto, and he throws one of those tough lefties at him. You can sit him down for that day and put somebody else in there and not have to worry about going down for your average or your OPS there either. So there's always things to think about when you're looking at some of these middle round safer players as well. And that wraps up our middle rounds here from players 1 to 150 that we wanted to touch on. Look forward to coming up for our top 50 baseball podcast and being able to tie up our whole top 300 series that we got going on here. Tessmonster, what do you got coming up?
Yeah, I know we're planning to record that fantasy hockey podcast tomorrow. Well, tomorrow our time. Probably won't drop immediately after this one airs, I suppose. But I've got a bunch of content ready for our viewers and our listeners. a bunch of names for guys that they can find on the waiver wire down the stretch here, doing some research on what schedules shape up the best down the stretch. So there's a lot to look forward to on that podcast. And like we said at the top, baseball season's around the corner. Brace yourselves for a lot of content from the Dynasty locker room. We've got a lot of really strong baseball minds that are eager to share some tips, tricks, and some knowledge about fantasy baseball with all of the viewers and listeners.
Yeah, it's definitely exciting and looking forward to getting into that regular season baseball content with you. Tyler, what do you got going on up here?
Yep, just wrapping up my preseason articles here. I'm going to have that done here by April 5th. So excited to get those out. I'm sort of on a deadline. Season thankfully creeped up on us. So looking at finishing up my boom and bust and some prospects that you might not have heard of that are going to really climb into that top 100 ranking this year. And then, realistically, outside of my free agency pickups on a weekly basis, I'm going to sit back, watch some baseball, and watch my teams dominate your guys's.
Well, there's always wishful thinking for that for you. Hopefully that wishful thinking lasts more than a couple weeks into the season this time. As always, find us at thedynastylockerroom.com. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, and interact with us. Comment on any of these articles that they're posting. Have some back and forth. It's always fun. So until next time,